Hello, and welcome to another episode of the TK Podcast. I am your host, Alex, and today we are talking about BAME terminology. Now, the term BAME has been around for maybe just over 5 or 10 years now, and it's a term that we use to group a collection of ethnicities within the world. So today we're going to be focusing on why we use that term, where it came about, and how we're going to move forward, whether we're going to continue to use the term or not. Got two great individuals in Lucy and Sandra that's going to join us on the call. So, as you always do, grab a pen and a notepad and enjoy the TK podcast.
We've got two guests on today to talk about a topic which I think is going to be very interesting, not just for listeners, but I think just for a wider discussion to have just between us. I've not been able to go and sit down and talk to my friends about this term. It's not something that we really use on a regular basis, but I do think it's something that needs to be highlighted, because I do know that in some areas it's something that they don't agree with, and in some areas they sort of see it as, okay, great, we can just use this word whenever we're referring to a group or a type of people. I'm hoping maybe some listeners might have guessed what we're talking about, but we're going to be talking about BAME today, and the term and whether it's right to use it or wrong to use it. So we've got two guests today. I normally would do the most amazing introductions for each of these individuals, but you know what? There's just so much that they can talk about for themselves. So I'm going to let them do their introductions themselves. So let's start with you, Lucy. Give an introduction to our listeners about who you are, what you do, and yeah, just maybe some interesting stuff as well.
Yeah, sure. Hi to all the listeners and everyone who's watching on the different social media channels on YouTube, etc. as well. So my name is Lucy. I'm a project coordinator here at Softcat. I'm also one of the internal network leaders for the Ethnic and Cultural Diversity Network. I'm really excited to be here today recording the podcast and just in general sharing my experiences and observations and learnings through the past couple of years being part of the network within Softcat, and just learning in general and going on that journey between that transition between the term and utilization of BAME and moving on to better and just newer understandings of how we're supposed to refer to the groups of ethnic minority individuals, and just in general, hopefully will be great to share my learnings today.
Thanks, Lucy.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Lucy. And Sandra, if you could introduce yourself and maybe give a special fact as well. Let me put a little spin on this one.
So I just want to say good morning to Alex, Lucy and Anushka on this call, and also to all of our listeners. My name is Sandra Kerr. I'm the Race Equality Director at Business in the Community, and it's known as the Prince's Responsible Business Network. We work with about 600 employers who really want to, take action on people and planet. And my lead campaign is one of the big outputs we have is a Race at Work Charter. So we have over 950 organizations, going towards 1,000, who have signed up to 7 key commitments about improving inclusion, race inclusion in the workplace. And I'm really kind of looking forward to having this conversation today, because in 2017, there's a McGregor Smith review that was a government-sponsored review into race in the workplace. And one of the actions was, can we have a guide to help people talk about race? Because one of the things I think Baroness McGregor Smith found was that people were not comfortable. So I wrote a guide in 2017, which I'm in the process of updating now. And I have some new evidence, which I'll be excited to drop on this podcast, which we found through our research. So we polled some people to find out what they want to record. So really looking forward to having this conversation, because we don't want to shut down conversation. We want conversations to be had, and we want people to feel comfortable or, having those conversations.
Precisely. Well said. Anushka, would you like to open up?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it's so nice to be on this podcast because I obviously work with Lucy, the wonderful Lucy, who does some amazing things at Softcat as part of her lead role. So kind of really hoping that organisations today get some practical kind of top tips and tricks into how we can kind of change the dialogue and not make it sound so scary. So I'm sure Lucy will be able to share loads there. And then Sandra, I've known for a few years actually. So Softcat signed the Race at Work Charter I want to say about 3 years ago now. And that was also at the time of us launching our race network. And we did actually launch it as the BAME network back then. And actually then about a year on, I kind of asked Sandra to give us some words of wisdom as we were launching TCare, and she actually said, and she held me to it, was there are not many IT organisations, I think there were probably a handful actually, there are not many IT organisations who have actually signed the Race at Work Charter to commit to the pledge and the commitments that are highlighted on there. So I'm really hopeful that off the back of this podcast as well, there's a bit of a call to action to the listeners as well to go out and sign the charter as well. But I'm absolutely, I think like the work that Sandra does in particular for the Race at Work Charter is phenomenal. The research that they've produced over the years has really helped me when it comes to the conversation at Softcat as well. Data is king as it is as well. So there's some really, really good outputs. So I'm sure, Sandra, you can plug the Race at Work Charter throughout the conversation as well.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
100%.
So I guess I mean, like this is a real hot topic. It kind of goes in fits and spurts in the press as well, and I guess to frame this, and Sandra, you talked about the McGregor review in 2017, but in summer 22 in particular, the Prime Minister actually appointed the Commission on the race and ethnic disparities to review the causes for race inequality in the UK. And in that report that was published a little bit later on in 2021, the Commission found that the aggregate term, like BAME, which is Black, Asian and minority ethnic, was just not useful anymore, just not helpful to anybody, and that it actually should just be dropped. And actually we should be focusing on understanding the disparities and outcomes for all of the specific ethnic groups. And I think like that might be a good idea just to start with Sandra in terms of your history and your knowledge when it comes to, the proactive use of BAME initially and why it was used, and also based on the work that you've done and the research that you've done in the past, is kind of, I guess it's just been easy to use.
No, absolutely. So thank you for that. And I didn't pay Anushka for that plug. But interesting. So this was really a trip down kind of memory lane to kind of try and research. And I believe terminology around BAME came into being around 2009, 2010. Prior to that, it was BME. And I know this because between 1990 and 2003, I was at the Cabinet Office, and I remember we used to use the term BME, and we used to use the term ethnic minority. And I remember talking to employers at the time when, BAME started to emerge, and I was like, why are we changing this? And actually, the vision behind it was to try and be more inclusive. So it said, BME was Black and ethnic minority ethnic, and it was thought about, let's include Asian people as well. So that's where the term, and then later on, I remember hearing the term BAME with an R on the end, and I'm like, hello, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
Refugees, and I thought, I'm not, as a matter of principle, I'm stopping at BAME. I thought, no, I just can't. It made me chuckle when I saw the term BAME, but some public, mostly the wider public sector, I think, embraced that terminology, and it kind of became a term that I started to use because when we ran our Race at Work survey in 2015, because terminology has always been that underthread of everything. So our campaign existed in 1995. I started working in 2004, and I can say, as far as at the head of the campaign, it's always been that kind of under what terminology shall we use? Is it okay to use Black? Is it okay to say, what should we use? So it's always been an undercurrent. So when I included the question in the survey in 2015, the results were that actually ethnic minority, BAME was second. Then came BME, and then really trailing behind was people of color. So, because I wanted to test this, but more importantly, 1 in 3 people said they don't really mind. People were saying, can we just move things along? Can we not get bogged down with gender? With terminology, and let's take some action. So that was really, really interesting. And that's why, as I say, when I wrote the booklet that I wrote based on that evidence, I actually did set out clearly why I'm picking BAME. I said, look, you could pick BME, you could put ethnic minority. I'm just picking one based on evidence, but bear in mind that 1 in 3 people don't really care. They're like, can we move this along? And another third don't like any of this terminology. So, and I would probably, not a gambling woman, but I would probably think that it probably begun somewhere in some government organization because they wanted to just lump everything together, really. It's a quick way of summarizing, but trying to be inclusive while they were doing it.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, like all the reporting, and I mean, like it's kind of like what can be easy for government to write reports on, or how can it be really easy to analyze and assess data and trends. And I kind of know, based on my role, when I'm having to write reports internally and you're having to monitor what the data looks like, you do just naturally tend to group where you can, because it makes your data analysis easier. But in this context, it's gone a bit too far, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm keen to know, because you mentioned a lot around, or it seemed like there was a lot of focus around terminology at the time. Why was it such a big thing? Why did we have to? Why was this there just a focus on we have to group these individuals together? Was it because there wasn't enough of a spotlight on them individually, and there needed to be a way to put them all together, or was there some other?
I mean, I think behind it is probably a mixture of a lack of robust data, or just a feeling, a perception that, one size fits all, which we know is not the case, which is why the de-aggregation of data is so important. So, if they found, well, everyone's kind of got this problem in some level and to some degree, so let's just say them all, let's lump it together.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened is the conversation is now people are like, no, can we examine? Because if we use the term Asian, there's a lot of people behind that. If we use the term black, there's millions behind these terminologies. Let's not lump it all together. Let's listen, understand. Let's look at the evidence and decide action, which might be different, because the data shows you actually certain groups may have more of a challenge here than others. So why would we just apply one solution to everything?
Yeah, and I'm even thinking about it on the global scale, I don't think it's a term that's used globally. Or, I mean, I've got quite a low level of education in that space, but I'm keen to bring you in, Lucy, just to see what your views are on the term of BAME as well, and why you may think it's a good thing or a bad thing. Because I think it's always sat with me that when I heard the term, I was like, not really a huge fan of it. It's never good to try and group individuals together like that. But I don't know, let's just go with it for the sake of the fact that this is what we use now, and people seem to be happy with that and not really making too much noise. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe it was just the communities I was in at the time. So yeah, I'm keen to know what you think, Lucy.
Yeah, definitely. I think personally, I'm quite similar to you, Alex. When it comes to the particular BAME terminology, for me, I'm almost at the neutral point of, I don't personally really like to be referred as a BAME individual, but at the same time, I don't really know what other terminologies or words that can be used in replacement. And I think that might just be part of the problem, that we're trying to find a replacement for another catch-all word, and it doesn't really happen like that. And I think a lot of the communities and friends and families and colleagues, when they are talking about the term BAME, their main issue is that it diminishes that unique differences between all the ethnic minorities as well. It doesn't really just go, okay, so sure, you are part of an ethnic minority because you're Asian, because you're Black, but then suddenly, if you're neither, you're just ethnic minority, sort
Yeah.
of tagging along at the back. There are sort of other groups of people that we don't usually consider as minorities as well, like the Irish heritage groups, and just in general mixed race people as well. They don't tend to just fall into one particular category. I can't really speak from experience, but I think when I speak to my mixed race colleagues and friends, they usually quite struggle with belonging in one particular set of community, never mind when that term comes along and it sort of just merges everyone into one, and it doesn't really differentiate or appreciate the individuality between each of the culture and heritage and things like that. And even when it comes to other terms as well, Sandra mentioned people of color before. I think in general, just through sort of media and entertainment, it's a very popular term to be referred to as in the US or North America. I've not really heard too many people referring to um, people of color in the UK. And I think that's also the kind of terminology differences between US and UK when it comes to just describing ethnic minorities in general, and even the term Asian as well. In the UK, it generally refers to South Asian. So people from Indian culture, Pakistani culture, people who are from Sri Lanka, whereas in the US, Asian in general as a term is referring to more of a East and Southeast Asian cultures, Chinese, Korean, Filipinos. So that's kind of also a disparity as well. It depends on where you are globally. And for a lot of the companies out there, I think it may present a slight challenge in terms of how to, refer to your employees to not be on the side of suddenly, oh my God, I'm offending someone because I'm referring to them as a different term to my own actually original understanding and things like that. So I think that's like another thing to be considered about just in generally when it comes to terminology.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting because I mean, even I remember when Softcat did our ethnic employee survey just to kind of really get an understanding and appreciation of what ethnic backgrounds all our employees came from. It was really hard you kind of have to find a balance because you don't want the drop down menu of all the different options to be, I don't know, 30, 40. And, kind of we use the government standards to try and get the grouping of 10. And even then we had some feedback. Whilst we got some really good responses from all of our employees, we got a 95% response rate. There were some people who were like, oh, do you know, where do I fit in this? I've just put myself as other. And even that kind of made it feel unfair at the time because you're like, oh, okay, now you're just regarding yourself as another ethnic, and I've not actually considered exactly where you are from.
So yeah, well put there. You mentioned about government standards that you use, Nush, and I'm keen to kind of open this out to both Sandra and Lucy. Is that the best way we should be referring to groups, the one that's the government standards, or is there a different viewpoint that each one of you have on how we should be referring to particular individuals? I mean, for example, if I meet someone new and I'm having a conversation with them and I can't identify where they're from clearly, I like to ask the question of what's their heritage, what's that journey that their family's been on, and then that helps deliver a way for me to go, okay, this person probably most fits this type of cultural background. And that kind of works in conversation. But when it comes to, if I'm filling out a form, for example, if it's for a job and they've said, oh, we want you to put whatever type of race that you're from, I can understand that being quite difficult. So I'm wondering how you kind of meet those two scenarios. One, if you're having a conversation with a person, and the other being if you're a business and you're just trying to source this information.
Well, I'm happy to jump in here. So I think when you're talking to someone, because I really am for having conversations, and I always say, why don't you share where you're from? What's your heritage first? And also share why this information would be useful, because sometimes it's part of your role. It can inform that conversation, or you're just curious. And I think with more and more people doing ancestry and all sorts of different things, people are going to become more and more curious. So I'm always for open a conversation, share your own background, because it can help avoid that where'd you come from, where'd you really come from question. If you say, rather than saying I come from Clapham Junction, you actually say, actually my parents, and mine happened to be from the Caribbean, they came from Jamaica, I was born here, and I have family who are dispersed in different parts of the world. That sets the conversation. When I say to you, so tell me about your background, it sets the tone because I've already told you my background. So I think that's really important. And then I think as far as organizations are concerned, use the census data and the census categories, because that enables you to benchmark your progress against what does the local demographic look like, what should the younger population looking for work in the area that you're recruiting from look like. It enables you to actually set targets and think, you know what, this is what it should look like. If we put out an advert based on what we know as far as all the young unemployed people, we should have X% from the different groups, and it enables you to track what you look like as a workplace against that. So there's some real clear rationale for using the census categories, and some people might say they don't go far enough, but they are what we have. And they are of some use because, yes, despite big buckets, it's better than just a hodgepodge of not knowing or making up new things that you cannot track progress.
Yeah. And actually, sorry, Alex, just to point out here as well, is like ethnicity pay gap reporting, as an example, is still not a mandatory government requirement, even though it's gotten to that level, and it's still not become a mandatory requirement. But there are a lot of organisations who are looking to produce this data, and sometimes that is such a great starting point because it can be really sensitive when you're asking people for their background and like their ethnicity. It can be really difficult, so that dialogue needs to be for the right reasons, because you're not doing it for a tick box exercise, but you're doing it because you really do want to understand the demographics so you can create interventions and initiatives in your organisation. But a lot of companies that we work with, Alex, as part of TCare, just actually don't know where to start. So Sandra talking about the census categories is a top tip there, I think.
And also remembering that everyone knows, if you say census, we all know what those are because we've had to fill it out at some point. So
I guess to challenge that, do we believe that what is on the census forms is correct? Do we feel like they're giving us the best options? I know obviously we get all of the statistics around what it looks like locally for our area, but is that sort of like that can be difficult for some areas, right? Like in London, it's so multicultural in various different regions, whether you're in north, south, east, or west. How are we able to use that in an organization and be sure that we're covering all of the bases?
So, full disclosure, in 2001, I was working at the Cabinet Office just before that period, and I helped to put that form together that we're now using.
Wow.
I flew to Scotland, to Wales, to Ireland. I spoke to people, of course, London, and to think about what could we use to, and things that came up that always come up about Jewish, about Sikh, those things didn't make it to the final draft. I mean, of course, I didn't write it myself, but I'm saying I was a big part of the team and went around the country having conversations with people who are Black and in Scotland and people who are Asian in Scotland, saying, what should we use? And I remember there were certain people, particularly because of the mixture in their heritage, it was never going to be perfect. But part of it is having that conversation to say, actually, this is better than nothing. It helps us to start moving the dial on the conversation. And I would say, just like the challenge is, if you then uproot it and change it, it's hard to track progress. But it doesn't mean that it should be cast in stone and stuck like this forever. I think just like we're having a conversation today to say BAME is now out, whereas it was okay 10 years ago. There may be a day where we say, you know what, actually the demographic data of the census shows there's some population. So this time, I think the other group is the one that's grown the most as far as demographic group. So there may be some work that needs to be done to look within that other group, because I think they had a write-in box to see, are there ones that are really growing that we might have quite another category?
Just before we start to talk about kind of new terminology and what's best for companies, I thought it might be good good idea just to ask Lucy about our naming convention at Softcat. So when we first launched our internal employee resource group, we did call it the BAME network. And Lucy, I wonder if you can just share your experience as a network lead of like kind of how that naming convention was decided and where we're at now.
Yeah, definitely. So the previously named BAME network essentially started at the back of the BLM movement. And at the beginning, we did try to play on that acronym a little bit and calling it the Belonging in a Multicultural Environment Network. But I think because it's such a long terminology, a lot of the time people just straight up referring to the BAME network, to all the new starters, to people who didn't really hear about the network before. And because of how BAME is interpreted in society, everyone just automatically assumed that it is to do with Black, Asian, and ethnic minority as a term in general. And a lot of the network members sort of just thought, why don't we just say what's on the tin? We should just call it the BAME network. It saves us a lot of time trying to explain the full name and everything else. So that's sort of how we decided on that particular name. And for about 2.5 years, that's the name that we sort of stuck with until, as Nush mentioned before, the Commission on Race report was released, and then we slowly decided to take that as a open house discussion topic to the rest of the network for members and allies to talk about what does this term mean to you? Do you think we should change it as a network, as a company? What are your thoughts? And we actually went through the conversation multiple times within a year's sort of time frame, with the first time being sort of 50-50. A lot of people voted, no, we don't really need to change it because it doesn't really bother this group of people. It says what it says on the tin, and there isn't really an alternative term that they would prefer more than the term BAME. And then the other 50% are essentially saying, if the government is saying that this particular term is out of date, then surely as a society, we should already be putting that way behind us and finding new terminologies to be more inclusive for that diverse ethnicity that we have in the UK as well. So at that moment in time, because it was a 50-50 split, we decided to just let time go pass by and see if that conversation would potentially change into either of the directions. And I think it was 2021's Black History Month where we invited quite a few different speakers to talk about different aspects of Black history. And I remember one of them being former professional football player and an advocate for the just in general sort of stop racism in sports sort of category. I think Luther Blissett, who briefly mentioned about his thoughts on BAME as a terminology. And I think a lot of the listeners and watchers of that particular talk from Softcat really took that term on in terms of, people outside of Softcat also have this general consensus that the term is very out of date, and a lot of people don't really agree with being referred to as this group of many sort of different ethnicities and so on and so forth. So that prompted a second sort of voting between the network members and just allies at Softcat in terms of what does this term mean to you. And at the end of it, it's very much a swaying shift towards that we do need to change because the industry is changing, the terminology is changing, and if we don't change it, we may end up offending more people than originally no one really had that much of a thought on this kind of thing. And then that's the moment we decided to go through that process of changing the terminology, changing the network name. And I think in July this year, we've officially sort of made that official. And even the new network name as well, it's called the Ethnic and Cultural Diversity Network. That was a combination of the last sort of most votes kind of names as well, because it was sort of swaying between culture and also ethnicity. So we thought, let's merge it together. And for the ease of things, we sort of shorten it to the EC network rather than the long name as well.
I think the point here as well is that you have to listen to your people, and I'm sure Sandra, you might be able to share some light on other organisations that you work with and how they've kind of decided to change or not change. But for us, that bit was really important. And I remember the network coming to talk to us about a year before the naming convention changing, and we kind of just brought it to the table to say, look, what are your thoughts? What do you think? And we just kind of just put it out there, didn't we? Just slowly, but we had to kind of listen to people around us and kind of do it for the people as opposed to what was best for us as a company, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree with you, Anushka. What I said to employers at the time is listen to your employees, talk to your network, ask them what terminology they need, because they're your main stakeholders, and whatever they pick, go with that. Because it is not straightforward. Everybody doesn't like every term, so go with what your employees and your people like, because they're your main stakeholders. Because you only really, let's be honest, we only need to think about terminology if we're going to do a public presentation, if we're going to write about it. And I used to always make this joke when I do presentations. Who's going to say, none of them are going to say, oh, we went to this workshop and this BAME woman, Sandra, was there. She was really great. I mean, please, nobody is going to say that. If they want to describe me, they'll say I'm black, but they would never say that I was BAME. You know, and everybody always chuckles because they realise yes, that is ridiculous.
I don't even think like I classify. I don't know if I've ever just made me think like I don't think I actually go I'm BAME. I don't, like I know I fall in the BAME category, but I don't go out, like I'll just go I'm Indian because that's what I am. But I don't ever say I'm BAME. I'll say I actually more often than not say I'm an ethnic minority or I'm an ethnic employee.
Yeah, I think it's ever since I heard the term, it almost didn't make sense to me. Even the fact that it's black and then afterwards, I'm like, why? What are we doing that for? What's the purpose, right? When that's why I asked the question before, like how do you introduce yourself or ask someone where they come from on the street versus in an organization? Because I feel like those things should be mutually exclusive. They should basically be the same. We shouldn't be making it as complex as what it seems to be at the moment. We're all different in different ways, and you've got people who are mixed, and you've got people whose heritage might have gone on a crazy journey. But I think it's just about giving everyone a comfortable platform to be able to actually say, this is where I'm from. So I guess like you said, Sandra, about if you're doing a presentation and someone does make a comment to say who you are, where you're from, I'm sure you've probably given that inclination or shared that information to say, look, this is my heritage, this is where I'm from, this is what I identify as, please use this going forward. And I think that's what it's about, right? The government we can look at all the statistics and someone in Scotland said this and someone said that, but it's about people, right? And people want to have relationships with people, and the best way to do that is to just understand them as best.
Yeah.
But I also think, I mean, it's only after the initial conversation with the person, once you get to know them, they're not going to say, hello, I'm going to meet BAME Sandra again, or I'm going to meet Asian. Sandra. You're not, because we already know each other. So it's just curiosity at the beginning and understanding. And, let's be honest, if you really want to be technical, even black people aren't actually black, they're brown, but we know what we mean. We're going with it because it means there's some ancestry from Africa and that part of the world. Let's just go with that because we know what we're trying to achieve. But as I say, once you get past the initial, once you get to know people, and that's why I'm a real big advocate of two-way mentoring, mutual mentoring, where people mentor people from different backgrounds, and obviously the leader then who may be from a white background gets to understand a bit more of the nuances and the challenges and realize that there really are challenges, even though they may not have experienced them. And then the person from maybe a diverse background who hasn't maybe had some of the opportunities, the networks don't understand how the system works within the organization, can get that benefit of that kind of nuanced connectivity. And once you build rapport, then you can actually talk more and just understand more about the lived experience and realize it is different, and it's not a card when people want to call a race card. No, it's my life. It is what it is. It's not. Can I just drop a stat that I always use when I try to talk about this? Is we asked a question in our survey about what do you think will be a career blocker, and 33% of black people say their ethnicity, 23% of Asian people say their ethnicity, and only 1% of white people say their ethnicity. So if you think about those completely different experiences. So therefore, conversation is going to be interesting, and that's why there may be a perception, no, there's nothing wrong. What's the problem? Because it's not in their view, it's not in their experience. So that's something that I always say, you've got to listen to understand and realize that, you know, somebody's experience is their experience. It might be outside of yours, but that's the point of talking together to understand a bit more.
Yeah, and just to show our listeners as well, in case this is their first episode that they're listening to, we've done a great episode with Kirk and Christina, which is talking about diversity mentoring, which I think is what you was kind of referring to, Sandra, where we had someone who may be a white senior leader, who was someone who might be a mid-level Asian person, and they were mentoring each other in sort of both those directions. Really great discussion that we had with them, and it's definitely something that at SoftwareONE we're looking into, just to try and build more chemistry within the business. I think that's the main thing about it, and also it's allowing people to get more educated on things that they normally don't come across. I think I can't remember 100%, but I think Kirk mentioned that he had a conversation about food with the person that he was with, and like just the type of foods he has, and something small like that can go a long way in terms of someone then going to meet someone from Kirk's background who is from the Caribbean, and being able to understand, oh, this food is this, so okay, this might get paired with that. All of a sudden, there's a relationship that can be built of something that's so minute when you really think about it.
Absolutely. When I think about my history, you know, long before these things had a title, I remember having these kind of relationships with leaders. And actually, if you build a rapport, sometimes those leaders later become your sponsors, the people who will talk about you well behind your back, open doors and opportunities as you navigate life. And they come across the project and they think, oh, I remember talking to Sandra about it, you know, and you get those connectivities. So really big advocate of that two-way mentoring, that two-way conversation, rapport building to build network, grow understanding on both sides, and actually benefit both sides, often in the long run.
Lucy, how have you seen this work at Softcat then as well? I mean, you know, Sandra's talking about the connection and the people, and it's really nice to get to know people. I can kind of give some light on the practicalities of reporting and stuff, but for you as an EC lead, how have you seen the dialogue evolving and getting to know people, connecting?
Yeah. So for the EC network, actually, whenever we get a new member, whether they are a core member, so people who are of ethnic minorities or who are allies joining the network, we usually have a welcome call that's like 10-15 minutes just to sort of speak to them about who they are, not necessarily about what job they do at Softcat, but, you know, why they've prompted to join a particular network as well. I know not all the companies out there have this kind of D&I practice, and it's just really interesting at the beginning to see that person as an individual and know about their culture, their heritage. And in general, I think a lot of the conversation on terminologies or how to refer to another person's ethnicity usually come from allies. And I remember at the beginning, a lot of allies are quite reluctant to join the BAME network, mainly because they were sort of thinking like, oh, do I belong there? Do I have to fit in the category to be in this group? Can I still join and learn about different sort of aspects and of different cultures and things like that? And once we have sort of reassured them that this is an open and safe space for you to ask questions, and, you know, a lot of the conversations that I think we have nowadays, especially just between people, whether that is virtually, you know, on Teams or just face to face, intention is really important. No one's really going to take offense if your intention is very sincere and very respectful. And that, like Sandra says, open up that conversation about exactly, you know, like, oh, it will be so interesting if you are saying you're from this particular culture and heritage. I can find things from my life experience that's kind of relatable to that, and we can have a general conversation just about who you are, who I am, and we can sort of exchange that information as well, and that builds on that relationship before the next time you need to speak to this person about anything sort of businessy or sort of like intercompany relationship wise as well. And for a lot of the sort of ethnic minorities within Softcat as well, they find it really interesting, because I think with a lot of other D&I initiatives is very much of a, we're all in this one single group, and then the other ones are, the white ones are like the outside of this group, whereas in EC network, it's very much of a, even within different ethnic minorities, we still have so much to learn from each other. And it's just generally quite interesting. I remember one of the sessions between a lot of the members from the network, they were just talking about how their parents and their expectations on them and the similarities between the Black community and the Asian community, and just in general, like, oh, we all have the same parent types, even though we're from different cultures. And that's something that's quite relatable from a lot of the ethnic minorities as well.
Yeah. And we always use that kind of tag, don't we, as part of our allyship program, which is always try and get to know the person behind the job title, because there is a human being, someone who's got lived experiences, and that's something that we've really bedded in as part of that program. So that's really important.
And then also, I think the other thing, sometimes you find out, you both have cats, you both like shopping, the hospital, holiday destination is the same. It's that type of thing as well, that you realize actually a lot in common with people. And one of the things I always say often when I talk about these sessions is, I always say blood and oxygen. Everybody's blood is red, and we all need air to breathe. So can we always have that context, please? As we're having these conversations, we're humans, and in the essential, when you really shake it down to the bottom line, very similar as far as red blood and needing oxygen to survive.
Yeah. I've loved how we've talked about the the human being and kind of understanding of the dialogue and the connection. That's really important. Thought it might be worthwhile just talking a bit more about the practicalities as well for organisations. So we know that very similar to the gender agenda, where we've tried to make sure there are more, we're leading and we're ensuring that women can get to the top as well. The initiatives are very, very similar for ethnicity as well. And even at Softcat, the data really helps us. So whilst, we've now, our terminology is different for that group, we call them our ethnic employees. Our reporting is very much around ethnic employees. We also know that we don't have enough people at management level and leadership level as well going into those roles from ethnic backgrounds, and there's a whole heap of work that we really need to do there in terms of understanding that demographic. Sandra, in terms of the companies that you've worked with, what other research can you share, or what can you share from your experiences with companies who also might be using that data practically?
So can I just jump in here, because I do need to challenge something that you've said here about ethnic employees. Everybody has an ethnicity, including white people. And the reason why this is a term about ethnic minority, ethnic majority, white majority, this is where that terminology comes from.
Really fair,
and that's why some people hate even the term ethnic minority, because they say global majority. This is where that comes from. So I think what matters is, number one, everyone's got an ethnicity. So that's why it's figuring out. I actually have started to use ethnically diverse, because I think actually we get rid of the minority word and look at spectrum, whatever that may be. And I think what matters with for employers is granulating the insights. So, for example, one of the big ones is, you talked about it, Nisha, is ethnicity pay gap reporting. So if you choose to publicize, you might not have the numbers to be able to say, our Black employees X from Caribbean background, or the ones from an African background, or Asian people from Bangladesh, or whatever. But what you can do is know what that narrative is, know that the disparities exist, and have the conversations and build conversation into your plans, strategies, making it comfortable, making it okay by saying we must have the conversation, we must look at the granularity to understand where the disparities exist, and it's back to where we were at the beginning, so we can make sure everyone's getting the right pay, performance, opportunities, and we're actually reflecting the demographic of the UK as it changes, travel to work population, the talent that's available in the organisation. So the good employers are really looking at where they might not publicly share the numbers. They do actively look at, not only for pay and reward, look at survey results as well. By granular, is everybody happy? Looking at recruitment by different group as well, to ensure at attraction stage, does that go through right to recruitment? And I would say, the ones who are always actively doing these things would always be the professional firms. They're the first out of the gate, publish their pay gaps, make sure they're monitoring, really kind of looking at data and reward. They will always be the first ones. But as I say, in the charter, there's almost, we're moving quickly. And the first question that signatories and potential always say, well, we need to get our data sorted out. So that's a growing area where employers are working on it. And they'd all say you can't get that data overnight, but once you get it, you can use it to start to examine what's going on in the workplace.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because that is actually how we use the data internally as well, is not just for the pay gap report, because we've committed to doing that year in, year out. We'll be producing the third one now. It goes out next week. The other bit is actually around the employee engagement. So I look after that area at Softcat, and it's being able to kind of look and analyse the trends again when it year in, year out on the experience that people from a white background compared to ethnic backgrounds, kind of how does that compare and contrast. And actually it's really refreshing when you see the employee engagement scores actually increasing due to some of the initiatives and the interventions that we've created as well. So I'm really pleased that we can do that, because we have that demographic data.
I've got a question, I guess, about that, because that's quite interesting to me, around employee engagement and that increasing around different, all hues of ethnicities. What, for businesses out there, what do you think is the key part that's helped with that? I know you said you've built groups and stuff like that, but there's got to be people who want to be involved in wanting to do those things. And even me thinking about it from a small business standpoint, you might be 2 of 50 or 2 of 100, right? And it might be a little bit more difficult to have that infrastructure behind you to say, okay, let's go and make these groups that are going to be supportive of you. And maybe you don't have that personality to be that maybe extroverted enough in the business to say, we need to do this, let's go and do more, let's go and be better in this space. So I'm keen to know what maybe might be the top 3 sort of ideas that you decided to go ahead with, to say, you know what, this is what's going to help us at least take a step forward in the direction that we want to.
I mean, I would jump in. So I would say, first of all, by signing the Race at Work Charter, you commit to have the senior leader at the top table who's going to take a leadership position on this and ensure that action is addressed, that the voices of employers get to the top table. The second thing I would say is look how you can form a kind of an advisory group with different people to support that person who can make sure the voices are heard. It's a place to, and using, for example, if you look at your employee survey and you think, when we cut it, are we feeling valued? Certain groups are less likely to say that they're valued. Then you would kind of convene a listening group to hear directly, talk to the employers and say, curiously, and say, this has come out in our survey. Can you help us understand what some of these things would be? And I would know without checking, basically, some of the things worth investigating, because of our Race at Work survey trends. One of the very consistent trends, when we've asked the whole collective group of Black, Asian, mixed race, ethnically diverse people, and we've done it in 2015, 2018, and 2021, we asked, is progression important to you? 70% say yes. Very consistent. And then when we asked the question, would you be prepared to do some kind of fast track? You're prepared to do the work. Around 45, 43, 40% will say yes. So you can always start there around progression. Mm-hmm. And also when we've dug through the data, people from these different backgrounds are more likely to have gone and get the degrees, the PhDs or whatever, but it doesn't translate to progression. And I think that's why that desire to progress is there.
Do you think that's do you think that's connected to the term that I've always heard, that I have to work twice as harder? Do you think that's why the stats come in like that, because it's sort of been embedded from parents and parents before that?
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I would say I wish it wasn't true. My experience is it is true, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. It's the element of, I'd like to say, oh, no, just work smarter. I've been on the course about working smarter, and I've done smart. And what I'm saying, I've become successful, and I'm grateful for that. But I've had to work hard. and I have done things multiple times. This is normal. And there was a report that Runnymede Trust and Fawcett Society put out recently called Broken Ladders. They talked to over 2,000 women from different ethnic backgrounds, and the messages sounded so familiar. And that was one of them, about having to repeat things. And when you go, you've done it, you do what your line manager says, and then they say you don't have enough experience, or you need to demonstrate again, and you think, but I did that, So that's part of the journey. And I don't think that report was published May this year. So
still really fresh. What do you get to hear about, Lucy? Do you feel like this is the same sentiments are there within our networks?
I think it does depend, like Alex mentioned before, it really does depend on the business size and the employee group size as well, who do, fall under the ethnic minority side. I've spoken with a couple of sort of business D&I leaders previously, and I think for some of the businesses, they decided to go into the approach of having a particular ethnicity sort of minority group together. So they will have a Black ethnic group, an Asian one, and then another one for like Southeast Asian one, or a different one that sort of went into a particular race or category in that kind of mindset, rather than saying, here's one group of people and you can be all ethnic minorities and be as diverse as you can, kind of thing. I think it's really important for that sort of messaging from senior leaders to its employees in terms of, we're not trying to group you all together because we think you're the other ones. We're here to support you. There are sort of different levels of support that senior leaders could advocate for its employees as well. And I think in this day and age, we do tend to see the sort of more foundational level of employees being more ethnically diverse, rather than more sort of middle management and senior management as well. And with that, it's very much like Sandra said, it's a trickle down messaging from the top, and that's when your employees could feel, you do value me, you do value my contribution, and that's not just on the work that I do, but overall as a person, what I'm contributing to the diversity in terms of all the innovation that I bring to the company as well. But it is very much of a, if you see the change and if you see role models, and whether or not that is, of your ethnicity or is an ally, it's quite visible to the more sort of starting point employees, like recent graduates or apprentices. They can see that visible change, and it will be much more of a motivation for them to become that role model. And I think someone has to start somewhere. If you can't see that role model, you kind of have to make the changes and suppose, make that ambition to be that role model, and then you can be that aspiration for others as well.
I mean, I always find it a little bit cringe, but I mean, like I talk to all the new starters when they join Softcat, because I want to make sure I'm bedding in the company culture and talking to them about how we've got to where we are, but more importantly, talking about the inclusion and how actually the responsibility of creating an inclusive culture is down to every employee at Softcat, not just me because it's in my title, but everyone. And the amount, I do get a lot of messages from new ethnic employees who kind of highlight that actually it's really refreshing to see somebody on the leadership team who's from ethnic backgrounds. And you wouldn't, there's like 20 something of us on the leadership team, but if I'm the only ethnic person that they can see, yes, I do have to role model and I do have that opportunity to do my bit. But you don't normally hear someone going up to a white leadership person, do you, and go, oh, you're the only white person on the leadership team. So when I say I find it cringe, I find it a little bit embarrassing, I think, sometimes, but then I have to balance it out by going, okay, do you know what, we're role modeling, and this is a good opportunity for them to see that you can get to that level.
Yeah, exactly. Productions actually put a question in the chat that I think might be worth just sharing with you guys. I'm just going to read it out. They've asked, does multiple ethnic grouping perpetuate the division between everyone?
Well, interesting. I think I'm not sure about this question, what it means, but one of the things I'll just say what I found, the recent census, the other ethnic group is one of the fastest growing groups.
Yeah.
And from our survey, so I thought, let me look through our survey. Remember, I told you we asked the question about what do you want to be called, and they're more likely. I think it was 30% said call us the other ethnic group. So it's interesting. So I mean, just a quick summary. I'll give you a preview of what I'm updating the booklet to say. We found when it came down to black, I mean, in shorter summary, like I said, black people from either Caribbean or African background were more likely to say, just call me black. It was like 76% from the Caribbean background said, call me black. I think it was 67% from the black African background. And then the Asian background, it was different by, like, if you're Indian, Pakistani, Bangladesh, do you want to be called Asian? Mixed group were like half, where 49% said, call me mixed race. 29% said, call me mixed heritage. So, a bit of a mixture, but the other ethnic group, or, that's really surprised me. They were like, call me the other ethnic group, But I suppose people, it's back to, I think Lucy talked about, just say what it says on the tin. Can we just get as close to that only for public discourse?
Yeah.
But I think this is about people and their identities, who they are. Behind the label is a family members, dispersed family abroad, roots that they might not have even visited those countries, but it may be in their list to do that. And I think that's what we need to be aware of. We're really dealing with human beings. There's the clustering for dialogue and for writing reports, but actually see each person as an individual. And also, I think the other thing I say is when you talk to somebody, don't believe that they're talking don't let them feel like they have to talk for everybody from that background. When you're talking for themselves, make every conversation fresh. You can say, oh, I heard, someone said that. Is that true for you? And they say, oh, no, that was just him. So I think that's her. So I think it's that bit. Remember, we're talking to individuals. And that would be my last, final word. If you ask me, what would I say? That would be my bit. Remember, we're talking to individuals.
That's a bit like a plantain or plantain conversation, right?
That's a Caribbean food for those who don't know what.
It's a common one that comes up in conversation. It is. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Lucy?
No, I was just totally agreeing with Sandra. I think it's very much the sentiment of it's not a you versus me situation. It's not a black versus Asian and then all the other ethnic minorities group together and sort of fight each other. It's not that kind of scenario. And I think when it comes to racial equality as well, it's one of those that we're all striving just for equity, equality. Yeah. We want to be able to live in an environment and work in an environment where it is fair for all of us rather than, favoring one or the other. And like I mentioned before, a lot of the time we can actually find similarities between different ethnic minority backgrounds, between us as human beings as well. And that's the sort of, I suppose, takeaways that we could take with all the listeners and us as individuals as well. It's even when it comes to social movements, it's not just Black people that's supporting Black Lives Matter movement. The Stop Asian Hate movement isn't just all Asians supporting that. We all should be behind each other when it comes to this kind of journey to improve, social justice and just overall be supportive and happy for each other's growth as human beings, as different, ethnic minorities. We should all just shout about the good things as well, while at the same time not really saying oh, if this bit is, if this person from an ethnic minority background has done this, we should stereotype everyone. And that is the kind of messaging, I suppose. I really hope everyone could take away that we're just there to support each other and really cheer each other on no matter what ethnicity that you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. Wise words to end on, I think, there, Alex.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've just seen, I had to close it up. I'm like, oh, here we go. I always want these to be an extra hour or so, but hey, we try and keep the information as short and sweet as possible so that it can be delivered in the best way possible. I'm wondering final thoughts from yourself, Sandra, and yourself, Lucy. I think Lucy, you kind of tied that up quite well just before. But yeah, Sandra, is there anything that you wanted to deliver to the listener.
All I would say, my final thoughts is back to something I already said in this podcast about blood and oxygen. We are all humans. That we have in common. And if we let that undercurrent underpin our conversations, I think we'll have enjoyable conversations, talking, learning about each other. And let's keep the conversation going. Let's not be afraid. Dialogue is the way forward.
Perfect.
Great, yeah.
And then
I was going to say this, and I know like Sandra's not, she hasn't paid me to plug it at all, but if anybody does need a starter for 10 as well, like obviously you've got the T-Care team who on our website, we've got a whole heap of information, and hopefully the podcasts that you will listen to are useful as well. But also on the Race at Work Charter, if you just wanted a starting point, the 7 commitments, which actually was 5 commitments and now 7 to include things like allyship, is a really good starter for 10 with some really good research behind it. So, go away and sign it.
Thank you, Anushka.
Perfect. So thank you guys. So I'll do the usual. Please subscribe to the channel. We've got a bunch of content that's going to be coming out for 2023. At the point of recording, it is Christmas, so do have a good Christmas, and please enjoy your new year, but not too much. Always someone who goes too far. But yeah, no, please do enjoy the time you have with your family. Enjoy your festivities. You can listen to this podcast on Spotify. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube. If you want to see a full list of them, you've got that on Spotify and also on our website as well. And please, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague. Even take this and have a conversation with people within your team, because what we want to do is create dialogue and create conversation that's going to propel us in the right direction, not just as individuals, but also as businesses and also as people being part of communities. So thank you so much for listening. And that's all we've got time for today, and look forward to having you tune into the next one. So take care and thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. So please continue the dialogue on socials. To stay updated on when we release the next episode, follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter at TC4RE. And don't forget to check our website at www.tcare.org for more information and content on today's topics.